Okay, welcome back. So, where did pivots come from and why are they important? I'm going to give you the Rob Booker version of that story, and it's going to take about 2 minutes, and then we're going to move to the next lesson. So, pivot points, as far as I can tell, were made famous or popular by the pit traders. So the traders that got in the pits and yelled at each other and called out at each other and threw paper at each other on all, you've seen those old videos and whatnot. So floor traders or pit traders would bring with them a little card in their pocket. And on that card would be pivot levels for commodities, futures and commodities. So they would show up to work and they would have daily or weekly pivots or even monthly pivots on the cards. And then when they were trading oil, futures, or whatever, they would have those pivot levels. And if oil was, like, say, I don't know, at the beginning of the month, whatever, it was jumping up, right? It was rising. And they were trading oil in the pits, and it started to fall. They knew that a futures contract or a commodity was on its way to that pivot level. And they would do this on short time frames, longer time frames, all kinds of different time frames. And pivot levels just became important. Now, why and where and how and what, that's just, I don't really know. And you can look up the history of that and maybe get into that later. But these were really popularized by pit traders and floor traders. And when they came off the floors, as those floor trading places were closed and pit trading went out of business, they all went to the charts and they started using charts and did electronic trading, and they immediately put pivots on their screens. So I have two individuals that I want to refer to when telling this story. And so the first is a floor trader who came to see me. He traded in Chicago and he traded on the floor and he had the jacket and whatever else. He traded for Refco back in the day when Refco existed. And he brought his jacket with him. And this is the first time I was ever exposed to anything related to pivots. And this is like, I don't know, 2006. And he came to my office outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he brought his jacket with him to show it off. And then he reached in his jacket pocket that he hadn't worn since the last day of work on the floor. And he had this card. And on that card were these pivot levels. And he says, oh, I forgot I used to have this. I forgot I had this card in here. And so we talked about pivots, and we talked about the fact that he would show up for work, and they would calculate the pivots using yesterday's high, low, and close added together, divided by 3. And they would use that for daily trading, and then monthly trading for long-term targets, and all kinds of other stuff. And that was the first exposure that I had to pivots. Then the second one was I got really interested in these pivot points, and a gentleman by the name of Gary Fluker came to my office. And so Gary Fluker's wife was an emergency room doctor in New York City, and they lived on the Upper West Side. And Gary was a hedge fund manager, and he managed money inside of Julius Baer, the big bank, or whatever it was, investment firm. And then he went on to manage his own fund. And he was a very, very successful hedge fund guy. And he came to my office. She bought him as a birthday present a trip to my office without really telling me. This guy shows up at my office. And we spent 4 days, at least 4 days, with his Bloomberg terminal on his laptop, and we just dove into the statistics related to pivot points. And we built spreadsheets after spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet. And we even created Gmail addresses, Mad Spreadsheets with a Z and Mad Spreadsheets with an S. We created our own Gmail addresses. We got way into it. And we calculated the likelihood that pivot points would be touched. Now, we're looking at monthly pivot points in these lessons here because they're the most important and most relevant for our purposes. I don't encourage you to go off and study any other kinds of pivots, daily, weekly, 4-hour. I don't encourage you to do that. But Gary and I did, and we did a massive study, and we looked back 20 plus years at all kinds of different financial instruments, currencies, commodities, and stocks. And we looked at the likelihood that a stock or a currency or a commodity would touch or move to its pivot point. And the results that we got were astounding. And in the next lesson, I'm going to tell you what those results were and how it led to a complete view of how to use pivots.